Well, good evening, everybody. I think we may still have a few people that are jumping on, but we have a good group, hopefully. And I asked Jean O'Toole from the New York Beef Council just to add a few comments. She's taking a different training tonight, so she just wanted to share a few words. And I will advance the slide for her. She just wants to review a little bit of her Beef Council and some of their priorities and the connection with BQA.
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks for inviting me to join in and say hello to everyone. I can't see who's all invited, although I did see Steve Olson, and and congratulations and good for you either to A, get certified, or B, get your recertification. It's very important because what you see there is our checkoff and strategic priorities and what we're doing with your checkoff dollars. And it all goes towards promotion and education. And on the left, you can see that we try and promote and strengthen beef and that value proposition, and that we are all about consumer, and that consumer trust connection is so, so important. And that's where BQA comes in. And then also that consumer confidence. Again, BQA is huge with that because that's what we talk about when we're on the farms. And those, you got to bounce back. Those priorities on the left, those are basically our initiatives. And as you see here, we focus hard on the producer yourselves, BQA, MBA, which is that Masters of Beef Advocacy, the least expensive MBA you'll ever get. The beef core training that we did back in February, 35 new members. And then what we do with our consumers and what we do with our influencers. And that $1 overall is at $11.91 cent return on your investment, whether it's dollars that you may see in the bank or overall what you're getting for your beef. I often tell students, how often do you put $1 in a vending machine and get $11.91 back, or a candy bar that's worth $11.91. So let me go back real quick, and then you can launch your BQA. Why BQA is so important to us as a Beef Council and checkoff and our consumers and our influencers is how I talk about it on the farm. I grew up in food service. I've been 15 years with Beef Council, but 20 years with food service. And in food service, we had HACCP protocols, critical control points, just like you do on the farm, just like they do in processing, just like they do when it comes to the table from farm to fork. But that BQA is that quality assurance aspect of it. That's the only part that the checkoff can touch, what you do and how you do it. And I talk about those HACCPs that, you've got your big chains out there, they're following HACCP protocols, and you have your mom and pop restaurants following the same exact protocols. And we talk about it because oftentimes people come to our smaller farms here in New York and go, well, these nice farms, they're so small and cute, but what about those big factory farms out in the Midwest? And how we talk about it is that, look, BQA sets the standard on quality and handling and all that you do for that animal and on your farm. And so you little guys are practicing the same as the big guys and vice versa, because you all want that quality product at the end of the day, whether it's sold in retail, on your farms, out of your freezers, or in food service. So that's how important it is, especially for you guys to take out the time now, interact with Nancy tonight, go and get your second tier if you so wish, and that third party verification with your vet and oh my God, VCPR. So thank you again. Again, I'm Jean O'Toole. I'm the exec at the New York Beef Council. Look at nybeef.org and get that information as to how to work with us or to follow us on all of our social channels. There's some really cool and exciting things coming out. Got a burger contest going now, and May Beef Month is coming up. And way to go, everyone. Have a good evening. And thanks so much, Nancy. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Thanks, Jean. Have a good class.
Thanks. Have a good one.
So welcome, everybody. We'll get going into the presentation. The BQA program is actually, it's a national program. It's coordinated on the state level, and the members of our committee that help oversee BQA in the state are listed at the bottom of this one slide. And Melanie Hemingway, I don't know if she specifically said it, but she sits on our advisory committee. So I'm really happy to have her with us tonight. And this was Jean's little slide she reviewed for us. So as I said, it's a voluntary program. There is a contract that everybody will need to sign and get back to me. I am the co-coordinator for New York State, and we recently lost Catherine Stager from the Beef Council as the other co-coordinator. So just for me to keep track of paperwork, if it can all somehow come back to me and we can have some discussion around that later. There's different ways to send it back, whether you can email it, even take a photo. If that'll work, send it back. Mail, we've got lots of options, fax. So with your participation tonight in the training and passing the quiz that we'll take later, and I have to say now, don't sweat it. Nobody has ever failed. Everybody's passed. So that shouldn't be an issue. We'll go over it afterwards. So if there are questions, we can review that as a group. So that counts as level 1 certification, even if you did the online training. That's another way to get level 1 certified. For level 2 in New York, that's an added piece. There's only a handful of states that have that option. You can get certified by attending a shoot site training and demonstrating a proper administration of a sub-Q injection. And also a requirement is to have a valid veterinary client-patient relationship. Recertification is required, and that is due every 3 years. You can just review your BQA contract, participate in some kind of continuing ed, which this does count for recertification, plus renew your VCPR if you're certified at level 2. And all those details are listed at the NewYorkBeef.org website under the Farmer's Fence Post. We've got it all listed there very nicely, well organized. So just a little history of the BQA program. It was started in the early 80s with a FSIS, which is Food Safety Inspection Service pilot project. And it was started due to all the residues that they were finding in meat. And roughly 2.5% of the fed cattle had violated residues. So they started this pilot, and then with the initiation of the BQA program, after 2 years, those residues dropped from that 2.5% down to 0%. So that was a very successful campaign there to reduce those residues. The NCBA, which is the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which is funded by the checkoff, they started conducting audits. And it was a way to kind of gauge the success, the progress of the BQA program. So after they took care of the residues, they started to address these lesions or grizzly spots, cancers, whatever you want to call those that were showing up in meat. And they moved away from those intramuscular injections with vaccines to that sub-Q injection. And that really helped eliminate a lot of those problems. They developed the DBQA program, which was the Dairy Beef Quality Assurance in 2003. And all of these quality assurance programs are science-based to meet those consumer demands. And so currently the BQA program partners with the Dairy Farm Program. There's a lot of acronyms here, which is the Farmers Assuring Responsible Management. So if a dairy has gone through that farm program, they're also recognized as BQA certified farms. So a little bit more of the goals and objectives. The goal of BQA is to assure the consumers that all cattle are shipped from a beef production unit that are healthy, wholesome, and a safe product. We sort of list the program with these objectives, and it's always to meet or exceed those guidelines set with BQA and those production standards for quality and safety, establish record retention, data retention and record keeping systems, And part of BQA is also to provide some hands-on training and education. You know, in New York, we do the shoot side, but we also do other hands-on trainings at various times. We've overseen the cattle handling demos at Empire Farm Days. I'm not quite sure if we'll do that again this year, but hopefully in the future. And we try to connect farmers with the program staff, veterinarians, and extension specialists, just to keep continuing that education and that connection. And it's to share that producer's commitment to responsible cattle management, just to keep our consumers assured that we have a safe product for them to find in the store or buy from their local farm. And Jean talked about this HACCP-like considerations. This is kind of a new piece for me in BQA. It's hazard analysis, critical control point, core principles, which is a mouthful. That's why we've gone to the HACCP. This is the acronym there. See a comment here. Hang on just a second. Okay. So the point of HACCP is really to look at what can go wrong and what can you do to prevent those issues and how to remediate if there's a problem. So identify production practices that will affect food safety, quality, and the environment. What can you do for identifying those control points? What can you change? What can you improve? Take corrective actions, set critical limits, and establish effective record keeping, establish control point monitoring, and establish those procedures so you can verify that your system is working properly. So that is a lot to talk about here. Just a piece of this new BQA. And I'm going to attempt to share a video. We'll see how my connection is tonight.
The BQA tip of the day, sponsored by Boehringer Ingelheim Vetmedica Inc.
I'm Ron Gill. I'm here with the BQA tip of the day. I'm going to look at beef quality assurance from a total management package. And quality assurance programs have to encompass everything that will impact the safety or quality of the beef produced on your operation. That means any production practice, any management practice, any animal health practices, and certainly the livestock handling component will impact the quality and safety of the beef. We focus on stockmanship quite a bit because it impacts how all the other management practices are expressed. If cattle are calm when we process them, they will respond better to vaccines. They respond better to vaccines, we have less animal health issues that we have to treat with antibiotics. Once again, lowering the chance of injection site lesions, antibiotic residues in beef, everything starts to play together. So as we get those cattle through the production chain, whether it be cows, calves, fed cattle, the way we handle them from birth to harvest impacts the quality of the beef we produce.
Oops, there we go. So the topics that I'll touch on tonight, we put this new slide deck together and we distilled down 10 hours of PowerPoint slides into about an hour. And so we're just going to touch on these topics. So you'll have to, we'll do our best to get through things. There are manuals available. If somebody could remind me, I'll bring that up after we go through the presentation and we can talk about those. They're a resource available for all the producers that participate in BQA. So cattle behaviors can result from various things. Cattle are born with innate instincts, and that most critical piece is they're really motivated to remain in contact, visual and physical contact with their herd mates. That becomes very evident when they're out on pasture. They tend to stay together, and they developed conditioned learning. They like routines, when it comes to moving from pasture to pasture. If they are run through a chute regularly, a handling system, they get used to that. And I suppose it's like me, if I don't get my cup of coffee in the morning or something throws off my routine, I don't like that. And that's kind of my conditioned learning. Same thing with cattle. They have sensory perceptions too. You have to remember that they're prey animals. And sometimes they perceive humans as a predator, and they may act accordingly if they think that you're a predator. And one of those perceptions may be during calving season. Some of you may have seen that with maternal aggression. And like us, we pick up, or like cattle can be like us with their hearing and vision. They perceive things through the environment that way. Excuse me. They may have a wider range of hearing, but they are limited in determining where that source is sometimes. They can be very sensitive to high pitch and frequency sounds. They also have a wider angle vision than we have, and they have a blind spot directly behind them that if you sneak up on them that way, you may get a kick. They see light, but they have a difficult time with their depth perception. They'll put their head down, try to gauge what the depth perception is. What we see as a shadow, they may think is a deep ditch. So that impacts how they react to things. And light, can be sensitive to light intensity. Also, if they see something different, something strange, like even a paper cup or a jacket hanging on a fence post or a gate, they may balk or hesitate at that. It's just they can't quite see it the same way we do. So it's just something different in the way that they're hesitant to go by or walk over. Cattle also have a flight zone, which we all kind of have that personal space as well. And if you kind of think about that from the dairy cow perspective, they may have a much smaller flight zone than a beef cow, since they're handled, several times a day. They come in close contact with humans. And when beef cows are out on pasture, they may not come too close to you, so they may have a larger flight zone. Again, if you step into this, it may have them move. You certainly don't want to come up from their rear unannounced. You don't want to surprise them. And this point of balance can be used too to help move cattle forward and backwards, depending on if you cross over that line. You go towards the rear, it may move them forward. If you cross over towards the front, it could get them to stop and move backwards. With a little practice, that's just a good principle to use when you're handling cattle. Alleys and chutes are a great way to help move cattle, and you'll often see a lead animal with those followers behind. Curved chutes tend to work better. Cattle don't like to turn corners. This is a nice wide chute here in the picture with solid sides, but that light shining there it's a stark contrast, and they may balk and hesitate to cross through there because they just can't quite figure out what that is. It's kind of a distraction for them. They don't like loud noises, jingling chains or whatever, anything blowing in the wind. Noises can distract them and slow down movement through a chute or an alley. Sometimes handling aids can be helpful to keep cattle moving, and also eliminate any sharp objects so none of them get bruised or cut or injured in any way. And always consider human safety first. Don't, if at all possible, avoid any small areas. Make sure you always have an exit available. If cattle get agitated, or if you get agitated too, take time to calm down. Even 20 minutes can make a big difference with moving cattle. Try to keep those cattle in groups if at all possible. If you have to treat one, it's best to bring in another one or two along with it, along with the sick one, just so you can work those cattle a little easier. And if you have helpers on the farm, anybody that helps move, make sure they're all aware of some of these techniques. Train your volunteers, your family, your friends that help out. And just keep track, observe your animals. If one gets agitated or something, just so you know and be aware of those situations where somebody could potentially get hurt. And regularly inspect your facilities. Make sure there's no loose bolts, no sharp objects or anything, no bent poles or posts, so nobody gets injured, no cattle get injured. And always remember, never abuse cattle, whatever the situation. Biosecurity is an important piece on your farm, and there's risks to be assessed. What are your risks depends on how large your operation, how many new cattle come into the farm. The critical piece with prevention just uses biosecurity, and that helps protect animals from any diseases that can reduce the risks. There may always be risks. So it just helps. Biosecurity is a piece in that whole management process here. Do your best to recognize and mitigate those risks. When you introduce cattle, have a quarantine area to keep them separated from the rest of the herd. Even moving cattle from one part of the operation to another. If you have that vertically integrated system, you have cattle that may move from group to group. Keep that in mind when you're moving cattle. Maybe do it as a group as opposed to adding one or two to a new group. And just use basic sanitation as well when it's equipment, vehicles, clothing. If you have visitors that come to the farm, it's always useful too to have these disposable boots or even a boot wash available for people that visit, even salespeople that visit the farm. Another risk comes from manure management. Try to keep your feed and water clean, your equipment. Try to keep mud, manure off wheels and equipment when you're feeding. An important piece is carcass disposal. I know rendering is becoming more and more difficult. There's less places that do that service. So there's proper ways to dispose of mortalities, whether it's composting or proper burial. Just make sure you do that in a safe location away from water issues. And water management is another important piece. Try to eliminate that standing water. There's soil and water conservation districts that can help with that ag environmental management program. They help manage barnyards, help keep areas dry, tile drainage issues around the farmstead and things. And the Natural Resources Conservation Service can help out as well with some stream crossings and even maybe some watering system out on farms, just to help keep things clean and dry and help you improve your biosecurity on your farm. Herd health management plans are important. To develop a plan to help keep everything healthy. Prevention is always the key as best you can. And it's involved with that thoughtful, responsible cattle management. It's just important to have a team together to help with these decisions. Sometimes it's a spouse, even children can help out with some of the decisions. Working closely with your veterinarian too, depend on the size of your operation, work with your veterinarian. That's a key piece. I'll mention that a lot. Work with your veterinarian on these things. You want to keep your feed stuff safe, well managed for your animals, and always practice low stress handling. In this piece, we talk a lot more about it's chute side on the on-farm trainings. This photo is actually from a previous shoot side training I did a few years ago. Excuse me. If you have records available for the next production sector, that's helps with any herd health issues. Control external and internal parasites as needed. Don't just treat for the sake of treatment, but make sure you have an issue before you start any treatment with parasitides or insecticides on your cattle. And it's important to establish that veterinary relationship. A little bit more on that vet client patient relationship. That herd veterinarian is a critical piece to help with your herd management, your herd health. They'll help you with decisions that need to be made on treatments. And the important piece to that is they're personally acquainted with the care of your cattle, and they're aware of your operation. They know you. They kind of have a handle on your skill level and what you're capable of doing on your own. They're always available for that follow-up consultation if needed. You have that working relationship, and they can help evaluate those patient treatment records as well. Make sure you're doing things properly, keeping the correct records. You can work with your veterinarian to identify any target pathogens. If you're looking to develop a vaccine protocol, they'll help identify those recommended vaccines and if there's any needed feed additives as well. They'll help set up that appropriate timing for vaccination, depending on whatever your type of operation is. Excuse me. They will help prevent or reduce any spread of target pathogens. They're much more aware of what's going on in the region or in your area. And if you do happen to have issues where some prevention fails, they can help you with management and treatment protocols moving forward. Boy, my brain is usually shut off this time of the night. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling on my words. An important piece of this herd health management is knowing how to read a label, picking the right products for your operation. So when possible, you want to select products that are BQA friendly. That may include, lower dosage, sub-Q injection. Follow the label too when it comes to boostering, just as outlined on that label. And this is a time when I usually take a break and we do some label reading on actual products. And sorry, we can't do that tonight, but this is what I usually ask, either to work by yourself or with a partner. You read through what's required for understanding on a label. So I'm going to kind of talk you through it. I found this label and our product is penicillin. That's the first one on our list. The indication for use. And penicillin injectable is indicated for treatment of bacterial pneumonia or shipping fever caused by bacteria, remember that, in cattle, sheep, this other issue in swine, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that, and strangles in horses. If you're looking for the lot and expiration, that's found usually in this little red square. Since I found this label online, it's not printed in there. Dosage. This is kind of a long piece here for dosage, and it's really important to read that whole piece. So it should be administered intramuscularly, and the product is ready for injection after warming the vial to room temperature and shaking to ensure a uniform suspension. So the recommended daily dosage is 3,000 units per pound of body weight, or 1 milliliter per 100 pounds of body weight. Continue daily treatment until recovery is apparent, at least 1 day after symptoms disappear, usually for 2 or 3 days. And treatment should not exceed 4 consecutive days. And do not inject more than 1 milliliter in any one site in adult livestock, and rotate those injection sites for each succeeding treatment. So that's a lot of product to inject. Say if you have a 1,000-pound animal, that is 10 milliliters per shot. So you want to move that around to don't have a larger injection at one location. And intramuscular is not really BQA recommended. That damages the tissue. And I mentioned that it's intramuscular. Residue warnings, there's a lot that's listed there as well. It talks again about your daily dosage. Milk withdrawal in treated dairy animals is 48 hours after the last treatment. So since we're talking about cattle tonight, the withdrawal time here is 14 days. So if the cattle were treated today on April 14th, they couldn't be marketed, slaughtered for food for 14 days after that last treatment. So that would be the 28th. So that's just a quick review. Hopefully when we do the shoot site trainings, we can look at this a little bit more and have some more discussion. So you see how small that print is on the labels. It's really important to make sure you're familiar with the product you're using before you use it. Anyone that's helping, it's wise that they're familiar with reading a label as well, or at least the dosage and the location for the injections. Excuse me, adverse reactions can happen and you don't have much time sometimes if there is an adverse reaction to deal with that side effect. Excuse me, management decisions need to be made, and it's always important to look at the big picture. A handling system is really key for this piece. Pain management is going to be more and more important with that thoughtful and responsible considerations. It's important to select too the proper syringes and needles and really consider that injection site. There's, additional health risks when you're receiving or acclimating or processing cattle, and make sure you develop protocols based on those risks. Age is important when they're weaned. Some other factors are critical. Where did they come from? Were they commingled ahead of time? What was their vaccination protocol prior to arriving to your farm? Their nutrition, a lot of things can impact their health when they come to your farm. Work with your herd veterinarian to develop and review your protocols for processing when you receive those cattle. It's always good to unload and observe them as they're coming off the trailer and just see if they're all healthy and there's no injuries prior to any treatments. It's important too to use that proper technique, proper timing, and pain management as well. With castration, the BQA recommends doing that before 3 months of age, using the proper techniques and pain management. And if you have any dehorning you need to do, it's best to do that. BQA recommendation is before the 4 months of age. Use the proper tools, work with your veterinarian for that selection of which process really will work best for you. Product handling and storage, again, follow those label directions. If there's an accident and an accidental injection, seek medical help immediately. It's an important piece too to properly dispose of used needles. Even some kind of a puncture-proof container works well, like an old laundry detergent bottle works fairly well if it's labeled properly and cover on it when not in use. Follow all your SOPs when you're using any kind of healthcare products. Wash your hands. Best to wear those disposable gloves. Some of those products can be absorbed through your skin. If you have any contaminated clothing, say from any kind of pesticide or insecticides used on the cattle, remove those contaminated clothing as quickly as possible. And keep your emergency contact info posted nearby. Keep it handy. That includes your veterinarian's number too, for just to keep track of those adverse reactions. You have that handy to call them in a hurry. Properly store any vaccinations too as you're working cattle. Store according to the label. Some need to be kept cool. Some need to be kept out of the light. And keep an inventory so you know what you have on hand and you use up what you have and you don't keep an excess and risk that issue of using an expired product. It's always important to follow those labels when it comes to IV products. Only use those as IV, don't use it any other route. Try to find those with the lowest dose possible. For injectable products, and select the proper needle size and syringe. You don't want to use a very small amount in a large syringe. Makes it more accurate when you size those properly. Never reuse a bent needle. That can be a serious issue. It weakens a needle when it gets bent. They're rather inexpensive to use once. Use as a few times as possible, and I suggest using it once. I had one of the ag and markets vets tell me the story that she uses when she shoots side. She said, would you go get your flu, your COVID vaccine and want to share a needle with somebody else? It's kind of disgusting. You have to remember, when you give injections, you're giving injections into a food animal. So just keep that in mind. And any broken needle needs to be treated as an emergency situation and do not market that animal. And use your product administration routes according to any guidelines from FDA, USDA, EPA. Follow the labels. And any extra label use should be used to a minimum level, and work with your veterinarian. You need a prescription to do that if you're using something extra label. Avoid any adverse tissue reactions. This muscle cut here is from an intramuscular injection, and that is not a food safety issue, but it is a food quality issue. You also want to make sure your injection area is clean. If your cattle have been out in the mud and manure, they can cause an adverse reaction, any kind of an abscess if you introduce any mud into when you're giving injections. This is our region here for BQA injections, that injection site triangle. It's in front of the shoulder. It is not in the neck vertebrae here, and it's below the nuchal ligament at the top. And try to select a needle, ideally a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch needle, depending on the height of the animal, the age. And this is demonstrated shoot side here. Use either the single or the two-handed technique for sub-Q injection. You have to be aware of where your hands are when you're doing that two-handed technique. You want to keep your fingers out of the way. You make a tent and can stick the needle in. And again, use products that are FDA approved, and that includes any feed additives, any veterinary feed directives need to be followed and used in accordance with FDA use requirements. I don't know if anybody's unmuted. Does anybody use any growth promoting hormones, any growth implants with their cattle? I've kind of rambled on here. I hope everybody's still with me. If you're not getting paid a premium and you don't use them, you're losing money. They're relatively inexpensive. They're about $3 a piece. And you can gain an extra 15 to 25 pounds weaning weight. So if you're getting $1.50 per pound, that could be a 10-to-1 return on your investment. You want to make sure you're using clean needles in between the animals to reduce any risk of abscesses in the ear there. I'm going to skip this video just because I've keep getting messages that my connection is unstable tonight. Locomotion is an important piece when it comes to making some decisions on shipping your cattle, moving your cattle. 1 is the normal score. 4 is severely lame. That's really a situation when you really need to look to see if that animal can be shipped at all, can be transported. I can share some links to videos if you'd like to watch those later. Oops. Lots of times there comes a time when you have cattle that can't get up and can't move. So there's always considerations there. This is a dairy cow and she's in a pen by herself, has access to feed and water, clean bedding. She's out of the way and won't be disturbed by her herd mates. And do not market any compromised animals if they're terminally ill, non-ambulatory. The only appropriate time to transport is to send them to an emergency slaughter if they're fit. They've met withdrawal times. So it's just important to keep track of that withdrawal time. And it may be a longer withdrawal if any cattle are emaciated or severely sick. And it may come to a point where those non-ambulatory cattle may need to be euthanized as a humane treatment. This is the landmark for euthanasia and just some of the indications of unconsciousness here. This can be some decisions that you can learn with your veterinarian when that appropriate time is and the appropriate method for euthanasia. Indication is when your animal collapses and the body and muscles become rigid. There's an absence of vocalization and eye reflexes. Eyelids remain open, facing forward. An immediate and sustained cessation of rhythmic breathing. Another topic for tonight is bruising and cattle handling. There's some of the ways to reduce those, decrease the risk of bruising through transport. Dehorning has always been a big piece, important piece. A lot of injuries can happen from horns when cattle get commingled and grouped together. Inspect your trucks and loading chutes. This picture on the left here is a steer that caught his back. He was getting loaded into a truck and he caught his back on the door wasn't opened properly. So that goes right across that loin area there, and that's a huge loss in the value of that carcass. So pay attention to low-hanging bars, slick floors, try to ensure that they have secure footing when they're moving, and pay attention for any damaged equipment, and just watch for protruding objects from a fence or bolts or anything. Just reduce those risks as much as possible. Part of the BQA program, audits have been conducted over the years just to assess the progress in the education. And one of the issues that's looked at through the audits is bruising. And so this was done from 2005 up to 2016. And these are carcasses without bruising. So unfortunately, there's quite a few carcasses that are bruised. On the other side of it, most of the carcasses were found to just have one bruise. Roughly 28% just had one bruise. And so the rest, their numbers posted here. So there has been some progress in some ways and not in others. Some more good news, strong majority of the bruising is minimal. So that means the trim loss is less than a pound. So we may be seeing higher incidence of bruising. There's smaller bruises and less loss of meat, and generally just one bruise per carcass. Looking at a little bit more from the financial side of that, in the 2016 audit, we'll look at the loin, for example, since I talked a little bit about that. You take the average load from this audit was 36 head. Using the values from 2016, this was the financial loss from bruising across here. That's a pretty significant loss. And a minor bruise is less than a pound. So we have made some improvements with quality grade. This is just looking at some lost opportunities here. Quality grade, there's been more choice and prime carcasses that have been graded. We've lost ground in yield grade, which is due to excessive fat in cattle. We've lost a little bit with carcass weight. The hide branding issues has improved, so there's been less loss, or there's a better value on the hide. In the offal, we've lost some opportunity there, which that comes from roughly 30% from liver condemnations. So we have made some improvements, but there's always room for more improvements. And hopefully, you know, some of these improvements are implemented through the BQA program. Cattle identification is important, whether it's in RFD tags or the bangle tags, just helps with identification. If you're looking to keep track of your production, identifying animals for treatment, record keeping issues, those individual identification is important. Just helps for reproductive status, growth, health, just overall performance. Record keeping is important to inform those buyers of any withdrawal times, if they've been met or haven't been met. Keep complete records when formulating or feeding any medicated feeds. Maintain any records you use on pastures or even insect control. Just those important pieces as part of your records. And keep those records for 2 years. So residue is important. I've talked a little bit about that, and that refers to any veterinary drug or pesticide in the meat. Prevention is really the best way to manage this issue. And it just helps keep track, to keep track of those withdrawal times, check your records when those cattle are ready to be marketed. Again, if you have sick animals, emaciated, they'll need a longer withdrawal time before marketed. And any animal that goes to a USDA facility will get inspected when it's alive and when the meat's processed. If a farm gets caught more than once, there's a repeat residue violator list that you can find online and see farms that may have had issues repeatedly, and they won't be allowed to market those in those venues that they may have to change their marketing strategies. Nutrition is important for healthy animals. They should have access to clean water and appropriate nutrition, avoid interruption to feed and water for longer than 24 hours. If they're in transport or moving to another location or on their way to slaughter, and only use feedstuff and ingredients of a satisfactory quality. And use only approved products. whether they're USDA, FDA, or EPA approved. Any suspect feedstuffs, if you think there's any mold, mycotoxin, any issues, have those tested, analyzed to make sure you're feeding a quality product. And never feed any ruminant-derived protein sources. And if you use some co-products or byproducts, maybe it's best to have the ration balance to make sure you're supporting proper nutrition. Body condition score is a way to assess the health of the cattle, and it's a way to really assess the energy stores in those animals. It's a scientifically proven method to monitor your herd. And it reflects, again, it reflects that energy store in the body at any given point through the season. There's two systems, one's for beef and one's for dairy. Beef uses the 1 to 9 scale. And that target body condition, for cows at calving is roughly 5 to 6. So if you're a spring calving herd and you're headed into winter, keep that in mind. You know, you may need to be at a little higher body condition going into that winter because it can be challenging to maintain through the winter. You want to have a healthy calf. Through the if calving, you want to keep your cow healthy. If the body condition is reduced, she may produce less colostrum and milk for the calf, which could have a long-term impact on health. On the other side of it too, if a calf is over 7, she could be considered obese, and there can be some metabolic issues at calving and afterwards. She may not breed back if she's too heavy. Vitamins and minerals are an important piece for that herd nutrition as well. They help form and maintain tissues. And not all are created equal. Some may be a better quality than others. You want to keep those fresh, dry when they're out on pasture. Just an important piece. They may have different bioavailability, which means, you know, some may be a little bit better. There can be some issues that deficiencies with insufficient minerals. One that I've gotten asked about recently is grass tetany, and calcium and magnesium will help with that out on early pasture. New York is a part of the country that is low in selenium. That could cause white muscle disease, so it's important to know that if that's in your mineral mix as well. So just a couple of things to be aware of. It's always important to have proper vitamins and minerals available. A little bit on the environmental side of your operation is kind of that big picture. And most farms in New York, parts of the Northeast, have cattle on pasture. It's just critical to have the right stocking rate so you're not overgrazing or overstocking your pastures. That can have an impact on water quality. It's a big concern. A properly stocked pasture will reduce runoff. It'll have higher organic matter, have better soil structure, reduced erosion potential, and help maintain the water quality and reservoir capacity. Overstocked, you'll have more runoff, more water loss, reduced forage potential and vigor, more weeds, potential for soil compaction, and reduced animal performance. Forage just is a huge piece with production. It's just important to manage that well. Some other key practices, manage that forage resources with appropriate principles. Use, store, and dispose of all pesticides with care according to those product labels. Monitor and manage points that affect soil and water resources. And again, a little bit more on carcass disposal. Composting is an excellent way to manage those mortalities. done properly. There's some guidelines from New York State Ag and Markets that I can share with you if you're interested. The Cornell Waste Management Institute has lots of resources on mortality composting that will be available. We're almost to the end. I'm losing my voice. Long evening here. Emergency action plan is our last piece. And it's just important to know what to do if you have a severe emergency that occurs on the farm. You know, it could be a severe storm, flooding, some kind of an issue on that order, rollover, tractor accident, something involving cattle. It's best to be prepared. There's a lot of resources that can help with this. You know, some of the important pieces to have available to anybody that may be helping on the farm. I know some of you have an emergency action plan on your operation. Just make sure it's written down and you have, you know, your address, name of the farm available for anybody that's there that can help. Have your GPS coordinates, maybe your physical address, you know, directions to your farm from the nearest town, and those important phone numbers handy with the contact information of your veterinarian, your nutritionist, and whoever else has support, provides management for the operation. So just a quick summary. Remember, all these pieces fit into that management and that reaching that goal of beef quality assurance to assure to consumers that all cattle are shipped from a beef operation production unit that are healthy, wholesome, and safe. Follow all the guidelines, you know, and you run your operation like a business. I think that's another key piece. So it's always trying to do better, meet the standards, meet or exceed standards for your production system. So this is a piece for level 1 certification. We can talk when I get through here on the chute side if you're interested. Takes you to level 2 along with your VCPR. And that also helps qualify you for the New York State Grown and Certified program. Another education piece is that BQA transportation. Talks a lot about best practices for transporting cattle. Excuse me, some of the larger packers require this certification if cattle are shipped directly to their operations. Masters of Beef Advocacy is another educational piece. It's in a self-paced module of these 5 topics. You can go through it at your own leisure, your own pace.